Hello, archive members. Sam here from Scare Me Sam. After the episode on Granite Ghost Town, something new appeared in the ominous library. It was a manuscript titled Beneath Granite Mountain. It tells the story of 3 miners working deep underground on the day a fire started in the mine. Let's begin. The shift had started like every other. 600 feet down, the air in the drift was damp and cool, thick with the mineral smell of wet rock and blasting powder. The mine lamps cast small yellow halos against the timbered walls, and beyond that glow, the darkness swallowed everything. The Granite Mountain mine had been carved downward for years, each new level pushing deeper into the mountain. Timber frames held the rock overhead. Narrow tunnels branched outward like veins following the silver seams that had made the town of Granite one of the richest mining camps in Montana. But the deeper the miners went, the more dangerous the work became. Air moved slowly through the lower levels. Ventilation shafts helped, but smoke from blasting and dust from drilling often lingered longer than they should have. Most men working underground knew the risks well enough not to think about them too much. Frank Avery swung his hammer into the drill still again, the ringing impact echoing down the narrow tunnel. Beside him, Patrick Doyle held the steel steady against the rock face, while a third man, Matteo Rossi, stacked timber supports along the wall. The 3 of them had been assigned to a section of the lower levels where the rock narrowed into a tight slope. They were nearly 1,000 feet below the surface. Above them, somewhere beyond layers of rock and timber and darkness, hundreds of other miners worked their own tunnels. The sounds carried strangely underground. Hammer strikes echoed from distant drifts. Steel wheels rattled along ore carts in the haulage levels. Occasionally, a dull boom from blasting charges rode through the rock like distant thunder. It was the sound of a mine doing what it had done every day for years. "Lunch," Matteo announced, throwing his pick down. "It's not even noon yet," Frank scolded. "Well, I started at 6, so it's lunch for me." Matteo sat and pulled his lunchbox out. He pulled one of the biggest sandwiches out that the trio had ever seen. The 2 men continued working while Matteo chomped at his sandwich like a tortoise, savoring each bite as if it were a juicy hot steak. "Don't take your time with that. Half of us are off for the next week, and we need to finish our job before the second shift comes in, or they're going to leave us shit to come back to," Patrick lectured. "I'm not coming back," Frank almost whispered. Patrick and Matteo froze, both turning to stare at Frank, waiting for him to continue and explain. After a few awkward moments of silence, Frank sighed and turned to the 2 men. "I got the job at the factory," he said solemnly. "Oh, shit, good on you. Why didn't you say anything?" Patrick lunged and grabbed Frank up, nearly picking him up in a bear hug and aggressively slapping his back. "I'm telling you now, I wanted to wait till after the shift. Wanted us to have one last normal shift together," Frank said, staring at his shoes. "Been working together in this hellhole for 8 years, Matteo said, eyes misty. "I'm happy for you, man. It's gonna suck not having our fearless leader with us every day, but the factory job is a shit ton better than being down here in this hell every day." "I told you to stop calling this place hell," Matteo warned. "Not the hell shit again, Matteo. What else would you call this dark pit of hot air we are in every day?" Patrick laughed. "Laugh all you want. My uncle is a shaman. He can travel between dimensions and connect with other worlds. And there are places," he said, "where it is particularly easy for him to tap into his power. This mine is one of them. It's one of the reasons my mom didn't want me to accept this job. She prays every day that I get a job at a factory. She's going to be proud when she hears you have, Frank. If you can do it, so can we." Matteo smiled, and for a second he looked like a hopeful child, mustard smeared across his chin from his nearly finished sandwich. The men continued their work, laughing and joking like always. Then something changed. At first, it was only a faint smell. Matteo noticed it before the others. "Do you smell that?" he said, pausing with one hand on a timber brace. Patrick wiped dust from his beard and sniffed the air. For a moment, there was nothing unusual. Then Frank lowered his hammer. Smoke. It was faint, but unmistakable. Smoke underground was one of the worst things a miner could smell. Fires inside a mine didn't behave like fires above ground. Timber supports lined the tunnels, and ventilation shafts pulled air through the mine like a slow-moving wind. Once flames caught the timbering, the fire could travel through the shafts faster than a man could run. And worse than the flames themselves was the smoke. In the confined tunnels, it grew quickly, pushing out oxygen and replacing it with poisonous gases. Frank stepped into the drift and held his lamp higher. The air looked the same, but the smell was stronger now. Somewhere above them, something was burning. Far off in the mine, a shout echoed faintly through the rock. Then came another sound. A low, rushing roar carried through the tunnels, growing louder by the second. Patrick turned toward the main drift. What in God's name? The roar became a blast of wind. Hot air surged through the tunnel, strong enough to make their lamps flicker wildly. Dust fell from the timber beams overhead. Somewhere far above them, something had ignited. Oil-soaked cables, timber supports, blasting powder. No one would know for certain until later. But the effect underground was immediate. Fire was racing through the mine like the flames of hell. It roared, sounding like millions of demons rushing to collect the new souls. Another shout echoed down the drift, this one closer. Fire in the shaft! Then the first wave of smoke arrived. It rolled through the tunnel like a fog, thick and choking. Patrick pulled a handkerchief over his mouth. The main shaft is on fire, he said. If the timbering catches, it'll run the whole way down. Frank looked toward the narrow passage that led deeper into the mine. Their route to the surface was above them, and the fire was already moving that direction. Another distant boom echoed through the rock. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The fire was spreading, and the three of them were standing in the deepest part of the mine. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mateo said quietly, "If the shaft is burning—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Patrick did. "We are in hell." The three men huddled together as the flames reached the main ventilation shafts. The fire drew air through the tunnel like a furnace, and every level was filled with smoke. The wind underground grew stronger. It howled through the drifts, dragging the fire with it. Frank forced himself to think. "Bulkhead," he rasped. Patrick looked at him. "What?" "We seal the drift, slow the smoke." They moved quickly. Mateo ripped loose spare planks stacked along the wall, while Patrick hammered nails into the timber frame of the drift entrance. Frank packed loose rock and mud into the gaps, sealing the edges, and the roar of the fire grew louder. The air was already changing. Each breath felt thinner. Patrick drove the last nail into the timber. There! For a moment, the drift fell quiet. Smoke pressed against the barrier like gray fog. Thin strands slipped through cracks in the wood. Mateo slid down the rock wall. "Think it'll hold?" he asked. Frank didn't answer. The air grew warmer. Their lamps flickered weakly as the oxygen slowly disappeared. Patrick soaked a rag from his canteen and pressed it over his mouth. "Do the same." For a short time it helped, but the mine had become a furnace. Beyond the barrier, the fire roared through the timber supports, and the bulkhead creaked. A thin line of smoke slipped through, and Patrick stared at it. 8 years, he said quietly. Frank glanced over. 8 years we've been down here. Mateo gave a weak laugh. My uncle was right. The smoke thickened, the lamps dimmed. Frank felt dizziness creeping in. The air was almost gone. He thought about the factory job, about sunlight, about breathing fresh air again, and then the boards of the bulkhead cracked suddenly, and smoke poured in. Patrick dropped to one knee, coughing violently. Mateo slid down the wall. The last lamp flickered. Patrick's breathing became ragged. Frank tried to answer, but the smoke swallowed the words. Mateo's voice drifted weakly through the darkness, and Patrick cried. "I'm sorry, Ma," Mateo whispered. The lamp went out. The mine was silent, and deep beneath Granite Mountain, the three men never saw the light again. Today, the town of Granite is quiet. The mines are sealed, the buildings stand empty, and the wind moves through the ruins where thousands once lived and worked. Visitors walking near the old Union Hall sometimes say they hear footsteps on the wooden floors where no one is standing. Others claim they hear hammering far below the mountain, echoing faintly through the rock. Miners finishing a shift, still working somewhere in the dark. And sometimes, if the wind is right, people swear they hear 3 voices talking just beyond the edges of the light, as if the shift never ended.